Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions.
A lot of people will criticize our belief in the triune God. Is the Trinity biblical?
Well, the doctrine of the Trinity can be defined as the proposition that within the one being or essence that is God, there are three distinct but co-equal and co-eternal divine persons, namely the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, this doctrine finds its fullest expression between the Old and New Testaments, that is, in the intertestamental period, and it finds its fullest expression in the incarnation of God's Son and in the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, although you do find hints of it in the Old Testament. If you look at the Old Testament, for example, we read in Psalm 104, for example, that when you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. So the Holy Spirit is identified there as a creator. The Holy Spirit is also identified as omnipresent. For example, in Psalm 139, where can I flee from your Spirit? Where can I go from your presence? In Isaiah 63, the Holy Spirit is identified as a personal agency because the Israelites are said to have grieved the Holy Spirit in the wilderness. The Holy Spirit is also distinguished as an individual personality, as we read in Psalm 104, that he's sent forth from God. So we also have another divine person identified in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Son of Man figure, for example, in the book of Daniel in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, where Daniel says, in my vision in the night I looked, and there before me was one who looked like a son of man coming in the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples and nations and many of every language worshipped him. And his dominion is as a dominion that will never pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Now, the Greek word that's used there in the Septuagint version is latruo, which is the very highest form of worship and religious service. Indeed, the Aramaic term pelah, which is used there, is also a type of religious service only ascribed to Yahweh. So you have a divine person approaching the Ancient of Days and being presented before him, riding on the clouds, just as Yahweh is said to ride on the clouds as well. And he's described, his kingdom is said to last forever, and his dominion will never pass away, which is what we read of Yahweh in Daniel 6, verse 26. So we have a plurality of divine persons at that point. We also have the angel of the Lord figure, who is a divine person who speaks as the mouthpiece of Yahweh himself. In fact, he appears to, for example, Manoah and his wife in Judges 13 to announce the birth of Samson. And after he leaves, Manoah and his wife fall with their faces to the ground. We are doomed to die, they say, we've seen the face of God. And Jacob is said to have wrestled with God, who is the angel of the Lord. So God incarnate, God in physical form. And the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon and to Moses and to many other people throughout the Old Testament. So we have a plurality or community of divine persons in the Hebrew Scriptures. And in the New Testament, we also find a plurality of divine persons. For example, in the commencement of Mark's Gospel, in Mark chapter 1, he says, in the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then in verse 2 and 3, he puts two passages from the Old Testament together. He quotes from Malachi chapter 3 and Isaiah 40. I will send my messenger before you, who will prepare your way before you, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yahweh, make his path straight. And then Mark introduces this messenger as John the Baptist, who is preparing the way for Jesus. And so in the first three verses of Mark's Gospel, we have obviously the Father is God, the Son has just been presented as the Yahweh of Malachi 3 and Isaiah 40. And then later in the same chapter of Mark, we have the baptism narrative where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus, and you have the heavens open and a voice comes from heaven, this is my Son with whom I am well pleased, and the Spirit descends on him as a dove. So we now learn that the Father, Son, and Spirit are distinguished as individuals. And then in Mark chapter 3, we learn that that blasphemy against the Father and the Son can be forgiven, but blasphemy against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. So he who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit is guilty of an eternal sin. Could that be said of someone who is not divine? A divine person participates in the essence of deity. And the Holy Spirit, of course, is also identified as deity, for example, in Acts chapter 5, where Ananias and Sapphira are told that they've not lied to man but to God when they've deceived the Holy Spirit. In Acts 13, the Holy Spirit acts in a very personal way and sends Paul and Barnabas. And in Ephesians 4, verse 30, we learn you can grieve the Holy Spirit. So he's a personal agency. And so we have the deity of the Father, Son, and Spirit affirmed, we have the distinguished as individuals, and yet we have monotheism affirmed, the doctrine of one God.